Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso are edging further and further away from France and the regional bloc ECOWAS. They have now signed their own joint security pact, the Liptako-Gourma Charter. This charter binds the signatories to assist one another, including militarily, in the event of an attack on any one of them. But can this new security architecture end the rampant insurgency in the Sahel and guarantee peace and stability? And how does France's departure change the dynamics of the conflict in the region? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, the decision by Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso to establish their own collective security framework could further distance them from ECOWAS and deepen the existing political and economic divide in the bloc. CGTN's Deji Badimosi looks at what this means.
When regional body ECOWAS threatened military action against Niger's new rulers following the coup, the military leadership of Mali and Burkina Faso also threatened to join forces with Niger to fight back any forceful intervention by ECOWAS troops. Analysts say the signing of the Mutual Defense Pact is a clear sign that the governments of the three countries are keen to maintain unity given the international isolation they're currently facing.
Each of the countries believe that any attack on any of them is an attack on all, since they are all guilty of the same offense. And so I think it is natural for them to want to come together with the hope that that would act as a deterrent to the regional body that had threatened at the initial stage to attack Niger and forcefully restore constitutional governance.
They are trying to safeguard themselves from external aggression, which is not only from ECOWAS, but also in Mali we have the Tuaregs that are, threatening the stability of the country. And of course, then from ECOWAS, who is planning to invade.
Burkina Faso and Mali are struggling to deal with deep-rooted insecurity in parts of their territories. There's been no formal reaction yet from either ECOWAS or the African Union to the formation of the new alliance. It's also difficult to tell how the new group will operate on the ground and whether the three countries, among the poorest on the continent, have the capacity to fund and run the alliance.
For every infraction of ECOWAS protocol, there are processes to be followed. And if you look at the ECOWAS resolution at the two summits that they held in Abuja, it was made clearly that the resort to force will be the last option. I want to believe strongly that they are still studying the situation. At the appropriate time, they will respond appropriately.
Some say that if the three countries eventually leave ECOWAS, this could further weaken and divide the regional body. The jury is still out on that. But ECOWAS' threat to use force to restore democracy in Niger if diplomacy fails is also still very much in place. That's the more reason why the military leadership of Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso will continue to drive their new alliance, at the very least, as a show of force. Deji Badimosi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, let's now broaden our discussion and bring in our panel of experts. Joining us from Abuja in Nigeria, Yusuf Ibrahim Bako, International Affairs and Security Analyst. From Virginia in the United States, joining us via Zoom, Tulu Akirele, Security and Counter-Terrorism Expert. And in London, via Zoom as well, Alex Vines, the Director of the Africa Program at Chatham House. A warm welcome to you all and thank you for joining us on the program. Well, let me start off with you, Yusuf, because Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso have signed a security pact that is said to be a combination of military and economic efforts between the three countries. First of all, let's start by looking at the key drivers behind the establishment of this pact. What are those?
This revolution in Sahelian affairs, as I have come to think of it, has been driven by, as we all know, the complete rejection of France and Francafrique. And in their efforts to attempt to try and maintain their own security and architecture, they have decided to formulate this Liptako Charter to fight against any armed rebellion or external aggressions. Of course, the external aggression we know stems from the ECOWAS and the whole misreading, actually, of ECOWAS's attempts at solving the issue surrounding the Sahelian three of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. The Niger-led ECOWAS under this president, Tinubu, did what it should have done in looking at the matter and discussing it, and of course laying best plans in the eventuality that, of course, military intervention was required. I think the room was misread. The Nigerians did not look at the issue as one to go to war, but instead wanted to play out all diplomatic solutions to its fullest. See, we could see that with the different people that it sent to Niamey to go and discuss the stand down of the military junta there. I think what will happen here with ECOWAS is ECOWAS will play the long game. And the fact of the matter is we're talking about our brothers here in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, and we will do whatever it is necessary within means to keep them back in the fold. There's no point in them being totally isolated. But this new Sahelian Pact is an interesting one, and I think that it's something that we should be looking at a little closer.
So let's look at that a little bit closer, Tulu, because aside from the complete rejection of France by the Sahelian three, they say that the Liptako-Gourma Charter, that is what it is called, is the building block for an alliance to establish a collective defense and mutual assistance framework for the populations. I'm particularly interested in the mutual assistance. What does it imply exactly?
Well, yes, we can consider this a mutual defense pact entered into existence by military leaders. So it's almost a you scratch my back, I scratch yours. We know the charter established the alliance of Sahel states, and it binds the countries together as they work together to prevent or settle armed rebellions. So we're looking at a combination of military and economic efforts between the three countries, but the main priority is the focus on the war on terror in the region. Now, we don't have the details yet as to where this funding is going to come from, how this is going to work logistically, but we do see that these three countries have banded together. As Yusuf said, the ECOWAS intervention against Niger, Mali and Burkina Faso immediately responded that this would be a declaration of war against them too. So we are seeing the three countries bind together, and it almost seems like the Alliance has a raison d'etre of taking back power independence against France, because, you know, France was forced to withdraw troops from Mali and Burkina Faso. And Mali did also recently ask the UN peacekeeping mission to leave too. So we are seeing almost as much as they are trying to be independent, we are seeing them unite and attack the war on terror almost from a regional perspective as opposed to with the help of foreign counterparts.
Right. So, Alex, I want to come to this sensitive question of insurgency and terrorism in the Sahel, because Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are also members of the France-supported G5 Sahel Alliance. That was a joint force together with Chad and Mauritania that was, you know, tackling armed groups in the region. Has the G5 and the French intervention in any way had any impact against the insurgency in the Sahel region?
No, the G5 Sahel, the idea wasn't a French one originally, it was a Mauritanian one. So the idea was Mauritanian, and then the French kind of supported it because they were looking for an exit strategy at some point from the Sahel and thought that might be a better model for them. The problem of G5 Sahel was just how it was conceived, because it excluded a number of major countries that should have been involved in it. It should have been comprehensive. In fact, like the Nouakchott initiative, which was very comprehensive on paper, but hasn't been able to achieve very much. So the G5 Sahel is pretty dead now. 3 of the countries have had coups, and the whole initiative isn't really working. So this was already recognized in West Africa early this year. So again, not a French initiative, but the Economic Community of West African States was talking in Guinea-Bissau at a summit, and then later on this year in June and July, about setting up a standby force that could respond to putschists and to the anti-insurgency. And there was discussion of whether MINUSMA, which Tulu mentioned, is pulling out of Mali, whether some of their equipment could be repurposed for that particular operation of creating a standby force. So unfortunately, the Niger coup has happened since then and has complicated things. But there's been very clear thinking about ECOWAS to have its own agency and not having foreign militaries. That means no French, potentially no Americans in the future, but that also includes no Russians, having an ECOWAS force to respond to the security crisis in West Africa.
So Tulu, let's look at that, the effects of the G5 Sahel on the insurgency in the Sahel region. Because going by the challenges Alex has mentioned and those that were faced by the G5, what challenges or obstacles do you foresee, though, in the implementation of this new security pact, particularly when it comes to fighting the insurgency?
The main issue is the rhetoric. So we're looking at a radical Islamist jihadist narrative. So Mali and Burkina Faso have been under a state of emergency since 2017 due to these type of attacks. They've had over 4,000 fatalities in 2019. We're looking at 2 million people who have been displaced from spillover violence in Burkina Faso. So it's more about, yes, we're looking at removing foreign boots on the ground, but we also have this near enemy on near enemy soil. So what that means is, if we're looking at coups, military-led coups are to throw over the government, the existing incumbent government, because the idea is that they're corrupt, they're not handling the insurgency adequately enough, they're not countering terrorism or radical Islamist thought fast enough or effectively enough. So that's the far enemy on near enemy soil. The far enemy would be the French or the Americans. So now, if we're looking at a response led by African countries, we're also having to be wary or pay attention to the near enemy. That means those who are deemed to be corrupt on near enemy soil. So we're still going to have the issue of winning the hearts and minds of civilians, having a unified group of individuals rather than division. And we see this a lot in Nigeria. We see ethnic divisions, we see religious divisions, and it's the same across the region. There are lots of divisions. It is part, if I simplify it, it is one of the effects of post-colonial independence, but it's also, there are so many economic, infrastructural challenges that if you have a narrative of radical Islamists who are trying to win the hearts and minds, of course, when you're countering it, it goes far beyond just guerrilla warfare or just who's in charge now, which president has been overthrown, which military junta is leading. There are so many other complex issues to solve when tackling the war on terror.
So, Yusuf, I want to come back on this whole war on terror. So to you both, Yusuf and Alex, and let me start off with you, Yusuf. Going by the fact that this insurgency erupted in northern Mali in 2012, spread to Niger and Burkina Faso by 2015, and despite the G5 nation, G5 Sahel force, ECOWAS, French troops, American troops, we're now looking at where these three countries find themselves when it comes to terrorism. Do they have the capabilities to contain the insurgency at all?
The capacity of these countries, their militaries, I don't really see them being able to bear the brunt of what they need to do to secure their sovereign borders. We're talking about vast territories here. If we had the G5 and the Trans-Sahara partnerships fail, ultimately, means that there were deficits in place that made them to fail. The French or the Americans not sharing enough intelligence, or things like the French being on ground in primarily maintaining their presence there after their commercial interests. They weren't really in the fight to put away these terrorists. And it's told quite a bit on the countries, actually. Look, insecurity and the whole problem is one of a governance issue. Had they actually put more efforts into ensuring good governance and careful resource management of resources, then I don't think would be, they would be in this problem at all.
Alex, your view here, I mean, what are the chances of the Sahelian 3 in containing the insurgency? How much of a Herculean task will this be?
So look, if we look slightly elsewhere, there have been improvements related to the Lake Chad Basin, also in northeast Nigeria. I was there recently, so the military has improved in terms of some of its counterinsurgency operations. Northern Mozambique, much further away from what we're talking about, significant improvement. So where we have an epicenter of problem is what we're focusing on today, which is Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. And even actually in Niger, the security situation was improving. The coup, the driver for the coup that happened 2 months ago, was a lot more about elite politics in Niamey, the capital, than it is about deteriorating security, which was, I agree, the key driver for coups in Burkina Faso and in Mali. I think both other speakers have talked that the deficit of governance, the difficulties of trying to get development into contested, difficult security areas, very weak capability of the militaries in both Burkina Faso and in Mali means it's a very worrying situation, because 3 putschist regimes are worried about what ECOWAS was threatening, which was an intervention to restore constitutional order. That now has become a greater driver, which is about their own regime survival than betterment of the civilians and bringing development into really contested zones and eradicating and reducing poverty, unfortunately. Although the original drivers for these coups were popular, there was legitimacy to them. So these are complicated processes.
All right, a very complicated process indeed, but we're going to take a short break on that note. And when we come back, we will look at how France's departure may change the dynamics of the conflict in the Sahel and what lies ahead. To stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Let's continue with our discussion. Still with me from Abuja, Yusuf Ibrahim Bako, in Virginia via Zoom, Tulu Akerele, and in London via Zoom as well, Alex Vines. Let me go straight to you, Yusuf, because these 3 countries, and I want to look at the ECOWAS intervention and where that has left the region now, because these 3 countries were suspended from the regional bloc ECOWAS. What is the reaction today of the regional body regarding the formation of the Security Pact? What impact could these have, for instance, on the importance of ECOWAS in the region?
The bloc should actually engage them further and deeper in discussion, bring them closer to say that we understand your problems, but understand that you cannot deal with your situation in isolation. It's not a feasible path for you to actually chart. In the interim, it may actually, or in the moment, it may remove some of the potency from ECOWAS. However, ECOWAS is doing a whole bunch of other things in the region, spending great time and effort and resources on actual development projects that changes people's lives. So ECOWAS really is not going to be, I mean, I've read a couple of things which for me was a bit of a shock horror moment, that they've written off ECOWAS because it didn't go in and it spoke so bellicosely. And again, I will say this, there was no bellicose in what the current presidency and leadership of ECOWAS was saying.
Right.
They did say, yes, there is precedents for this. We've seen it in Gambia, we've seen it before. ECOWAS has a rich history of intervening in civil wars and actually ending civil wars in the region. So it's got to play the strong arm. But ECOWAS is going nowhere. It will get stronger, it will develop, it will pull in these Sahelian three. And
right.
Of course, this revolution in Sahelian affairs will ultimately, I think, make ECOWAS and the region stronger.
Right. Tulu, is this a setback for ECOWAS though?
We can't reduce it to a step back or a step forward. Things will happen within the region, whether or not ECOWAS exists. So I think I wouldn't consider it a step back. I would echo Yusuf's sentiments in the fact that, yes, when ECOWAS did mention there is a potential to use force to restore constitutional rule, and allegedly with France's backing, which wouldn't help at all. I think as we saw the response being from the other two countries, that we will take this as a declaration of war, I think we start to see ECOWAS is definitely going to shift its approach to ensure that this new alliance feels part of ECOWAS, doesn't feel a sense of division. But again, as Alex also said, these are things that will be moving and changing, and it's not as simple as, they're on their own, these three. So I think we just have to see how it plays out, but I definitely do not see it as being a step back.
Alex, some analysts are seeing the birth of the alliance of the Sahel states as a sign of the continued erosion of French influence in that part of Africa. Which new partners are we seeing countries turning to now?
If you're in Benin, the Beninois have been asking for Rwandan security support. And the Rwandans have made a pitch saying, well, they've done very well in Central African Republic and in Mozambique, so why don't they come into West Africa? So big question for West Africans is, do they want foreign militaries, meaning also African militaries that are not from West Africa? Mm-hmm. And that's a particular issue. ECOWAS takes the view that ECOWAS sorts its own problems out with its own people, and that they are, as Yusuf mentioned, brothers. So we'll have to see. But there are plenty of other security offers on. Turkey has offered security. The EU is now offering it's announced a new EU training mission for the coastal states to kind of build up capability. I've just come back from Ghana. I was there all last week discussing what the Accra initiative is achieving and sharing intelligence and information between countries like Togo, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana. So there's a lot going on. I do believe, like Yusuf, that the future is a stronger regional economic community body that kind of can regulate this. And I've seen ECOWAS perform very well 20 years ago when I was stationed for the UN in Liberia at the end of the Charles Taylor regime. So it can work, and I think we are at a watershed here, but it will be a bumpy pathway.
Right. I want to get your thoughts, all of you, on the way forward here, because I want to find out what are the long-term plans and aspirations of these countries in their fight against insurgency. How do you envision, them achieving a lasting stability in that region affected by jihadist insurgency? Let me start off with you, Yusuf.
It's about the region and the regional leader, Nigeria, stepping up to the plate and pulling in these countries closer. Niger and Nigeria, for example, being a northern Nigerian, I understand this very, very well. There's literally no border between us. Southern Niger and northern Nigeria, a lot of families have cousins across the border. It's just a line in the sand for us. So we need to really step up and show leadership in the region. But we also need others in the region to show leadership. Alex had mentioned previously about Macky Sall and Ouattara of Cote d'Ivoire. For me, these two people are vestiges of Francafrique, and their motivations are pretty clear right now and where their allegiances actually lie. So I tend to hold what they say with a bit of skepticism, and I also think that if anything's going to happen in the region, Nigeria is going to determine a lot of that. We've always expressed our independence once it comes to foreign relations and foreign affairs. Our history clearly states the Afrocentrism of our foreign policy, which is stated in our constitution. We will give 100% to make sure that whatever happens in the region is Nigerian-led. It needs to be, because we are the market, but we also believe that the rest of the region needs to develop its markets so that we can truly be integrated and have good governance, a region that is thriving. We've got shared culture, traditions, food, and like I said, family. So it only makes sense for us to coalesce and combine and actually enhance our cooperation. I'm optimistic about the future,
right,
but we have to actually pay attention.
Alex, you have adopted, a very neutral tone there. What's your view?
The West African space, ECOWAS, is vast. I do agree that Nigeria is the regional power, and there's an opportunity with a president in Nigeria now that has an interest in regional politics and has a vision for ECOWAS. It's unfortunate the coup occurred when it did. If it had a coup in Niger had occurred in a year's time, I think ECOWAS reform plus the Tinubu administration would have been better placed to have reacted to it than they did initially. I don't know if the full destiny of West Africa is going to be determined by a Nigeria hegemon, and so I do think that what are the visions of Francophone countries, especially the big ones like Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal, also play a significant part in the future of the regional economic community. And indeed, it will need to have common vision to fight the scourge of insurgency, which is a significant worry, particularly in Burkina Faso and Mali, but could still now deteriorate in Niger also.
Tulu, you have the final word here.
I would definitely like to echo the sentiments of both speakers. I think we're looking at good governance, leading by example. I think the end of foreign boots on ground is something that will definitely help with internal tensions. And finally, I do agree, I've said it before, the hearts and minds of civilians. I know that we are currently struggling and focusing on governance and countering coups, but we also can't let the radical jihadist narrative gather any more traction than it already has. So I think there needs to be an intentional focus on resources. And when I say resources, I mean minerals. West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa is home to a plethora of resources, whether it's minerals, gold, oil, etc., natural resources. If we can figure out how to take more of this back internally, trade, things like that, and increase the workforce of locals, but not for exportation. And if it is exportation, we're looking at building the capita of those countries themselves. So I think we're looking at a number of different approaches, but again, it all boils down to good governance, tackling the narrative of the hearts and minds of civilians against radical Islamist rhetoric, and of course, just making sure we have incentives for people to not join those organizations, those insurgencies, and building up the capabilities and capacities of those in the region themselves.
Indeed, a very optimistic note there. Thank you also very much for being a part of this discussion. Well, that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our guests in Abuja, Yusuf Ibrahim Bako, International Affairs and Security Analyst; in Virginia, joining us via Zoom from the United States, Tulu Akirele, Security and Counter-Terrorism Expert; and also joining us from London via Zoom, Alex Vines, Director of the Africa Program, Chatham House. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and X, formerly Twitter. And you can also watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. For me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi, until next time, it's bye-bye.